barely a minute after holding my divorce decree in my hands. I cut off the $60. 000. A year funding for my ex-husband's sister. She was studying abroad in London. My ex-husband called me immediately, full of complaints. If you stop paying, my sister will get kicked out of school. He snapped. I just smirked. Tomorrow. An even bigger surprise was waiting for him. I stood there, holding the divorce certificate. The red ink of the seal still felt warm, but my soul felt completely cold. It was as if I had just stepped out of a winter that had lasted for 5 long years. Exactly 1 minute. 1 minute had passed since I officially stopped being the wife of a man named Vance. I stood outside the county courthouse. The midday June sun beat down on the pavement, but inside my head, everything was strangely clear. No tears, no trembling, not the slightest hesitation. I took out my phone and dialed a familiar number. Andrew. Stop all payments for Victoria. There was a second of silence on the other end. Then, my assistant's careful voice came through. Yes, Ms. Madeline. Stop everything, including tuition, housing, and her allowance. Yes? Block all the accounts immediately. Understood. I hung up the phone. Just 1 minute. For 5 years, I had supported someone who shared no blood with me. I spent over $60. 000. A year on her. Now, all it took was one sentence to end it. I looked up. Vance was standing right in front of me. He was wearing the same flawless suit, standing with the same confident posture. A winner's smirk was frozen on the corners of his lips. Madeline, you finally came to your senses. He adjusted his cufflink. His tone was relieved, as if he had just dropped a heavy burden. We should have signed this 3 months ago. Why drag it out until now? But whatever. The main thing is that it's over. I looked at him. This was the man I once trusted. The man I loved so much that I thought he alone would be enough for me in this lifetime. Don't worry, Vance continued, putting on a generous face, even though you aren't getting any of the assets. Out of respect for our 5 years of marriage, I'll transfer, Ziche. 000 to you. Just to help you get by at first. $10,000. I laughed softly. 5 years of marriage in exchange for 10 grand. If I were the Madeline from 5 years ago, I probably would have cried from the gesture, but right now, it was so ridiculous that I wanted to ask him, who exactly is giving charity to whom? I looked at the property documents in my hand, running my finger lightly over the cover. Vance, I said slowly, I want to ask you one question. He frowned slightly, but nodded. Go ahead. Your sister Victoria. Her college and life in London costs over $60. 000 a year. Do you know who paid that money? Vance froze for a moment, and then laughed. Madeline. Are you delusional from the divorce? That's company money. What does that have to do with you? I nodded and glanced at my watch. 30 seconds had passed. In September of 2020, I began, my voice perfectly level. Victoria got her acceptance letter, but her scholarship wasn't enough. At that time, your company was struggling financially. I transferred $30. 000 from my personal account to pay for her first year. The smile on Vance's face began to stiffen. From 2021 to 2023. I continued. I transferred over $60. 000 every single year. That covered her tuition, rent, and living expenses. Every single bank memo clearly stated financial support for Victoria. You're lying, Vance hissed. Do you want me to print out the bank statements? I looked him dead in the eye. Furthermore, last year, Victoria wanted a new car. She said all her friends over there were driving expensive luxury vehicles. You came to me and asked for help. I transferred another $25. 000 to you. Vance's face went from pale to a deathly gray. That was company money. No? I smiled. That was my money. The air between us suddenly grew so heavy it was hard to breathe. Right at that moment, my phone rang. It was an international call. I answered it and put it on speaker. Madeline, what on earth are you doing? Victoria's shrill, furious voice echoed from the speaker. Why are all my cards declined? I'm in a store right now. They're looking at me like I'm a thief. Do you know how embarrassing this is? Victoria. I answered calmly. Starting today, you take care of yourself. What? Vance and I are divorced. I am no longer obligated to support you. There was dead silence on the line for a second, followed by an explosion. Divorced. Then you should compensate me even more. My tuition is due soon. And what about the designer bag I just picked out? I hung up without a moment of hesitation. Vance stared at me. His eyes were bloodshot with rage. Madeline. Unblock Victoria's accounts right now. I tilted my head, looking at him like he was a total stranger. She's your sister. You support her. You're a successful businessman. Aren't you? That one simple phrase made him choke on his words. I knew better than anyone else. Vance's so-called successful holding company was nothing more than shiny wrapping paper. His cash flow had been stretched to the breaking point for a long time. If it hadn't been for my secret cash injections, his company would have collapsed last year. He couldn't say a word. His phone started ringing. This time, it was his mother. I glanced at his screen, swiped to decline the call, and firmly blocked her number on my own phone. Madeline. Are you out of your mind? Vance growled. Are you trying to leave my entire family out on the streets? Out on the streets? I laughed. I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice. Last year, when you sent people to block my car, intimidate me, and force me to sign those divorce papers, did you ever think about who you were leaving out on the streets? His eyes darted away. I stared right through him. For the last 5 years, it's not that I didn't know what you were doing. I was just giving you a chance. I paused slightly, but now I realized that with some things, no matter how many chances you give, nothing will ever change. I turned around to leave. Behind me, Vance's voice rang out, full of pure hatred. Madeline, you are going to regret this. I didn't turn back. I just waved my hand dismissively. Don't worry, tomorrow brings an even bigger surprise. The door of a black sedan parked by the curb swung open. My driver bowed his head. Ms. Madeline. I got into the car. In the rearview mirror, I could see Vance frozen in place under the blazing sun. The anger on his face shifted into confusion. And then, slowly, into fear. He had no idea that this car was the cheapest one I owned. Just like he had no idea that the wife he had despised all these years was never just an ordinary woman. I leaned back against the leather seat and closed my eyes, letting out a long sigh. 5 years, they were finally over. But this was only the beginning. The car pulled away smoothly, merging into the heavy midday traffic. The city hummed with life just like it always did. But inside my soul, it was surprisingly quiet. It felt like I had just survived a massive storm and could finally take a deep breath without holding back. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. The buildings blurred past. The familiar streets suddenly felt brand new. Because from this minute on, my life was pivoting in a completely different direction. Ms. Madeline? Straight to the office, my driver asked quietly through the rearview mirror. Yes. To the office, I replied. Short and steady. The phone in my hand vibrated again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. Madeline, you're going to pay for this. I didn't have to guess to know who it was. It was Vance. I stared at the text for a few seconds, then sent a single sentence back. The game has just begun. Once it's sent, I blocked the number immediately. No extra words were needed. The car pulled up in front of a towering glass high-rise in downtown Chicago. The sun reflected off the massive sign on the roof, making the words gleam. Sirius Capital Holdings. This was my company. The truth that Vance had been blind to all these years He always thought I was just a minor shareholder. An ordinary housewife who occasionally made small investments here and there. Nothing more. He didn't know that all the investments that had saved his company, all the contracts that kept his head above water, and had passed directly through my hands. I stepped out of the car, and the automatic doors slid open. "Good afternoon, Ms. Madeline." The receptionists bowed their heads in unison. I gave a slight nod and walked straight to my private elevator. Taking it to the top floor, the doors opened. My secretary, Leah, I was already waiting for me, with a stack of folders. "Ms. Madeline, your lawyer, Arthur Sterling, has arrived. He's waiting in the conference room. Also, Vance's company just called. They were asking about the investment rollout for this quarter." I didn't stop walking. "Tell Arthur to wait 5 minutes. And put a freeze on that investment." Leah froze for a second. "But according to the contract, I know what it says." "I know what it says too." I cut her off, my voice perfectly calm. "But the terms also include a clause for risk reassessment in the event of significant changes. Vance just got divorced. That constitutes a significant change." Leah nodded immediately. "Yes. Understood." I walked into my office, the heavy glass door closed behind me, wrapping me in total silence. I walked straight to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the stream of cars and the tiny, ant-like figures of people below. The image of Vance standing frozen outside the courthouse flashed in my mind again. He didn't understand what was happening yet, but he would very soon. "Ms. Madeline." Leah knocked lightly on the door. "Mr. Sterling is ready." I turned around and nodded. "Send him in." Arthur Sterling walked in. He was a sharp, well-dressed man with the piercing gaze of someone used to untangling massive legal messes. "Ms. Madeline, I've prepared all the documents." He placed a thick binder on my desk. "I've compiled all the evidence of Vance liquidating assets, forging financial reports, as well as the proof of his infidelity. If we take this to court, we can not only recover your share of the property, but also demand heavy damages." I sat down and started flipping through the pages. The numbers, the bank statements, the photographs. It was all so glaringly obvious, it left absolutely no room for doubt. "What's the total amount?" I asked. Arthur adjusted his glasses. "By the most conservative estimates, around $1 million. $1 million. I closed the folder and pushed it across the desk. "I don't want the money." He looked surprised. "You mean?" "I want Vance's company to go bankrupt." Silence hung in the room for a few seconds. Arthur looked at me. A flash of surprise crossed his eyes, quickly replaced by utter seriousness. "That will be much more difficult. I know. It will take time. It will take effort. And it might drag out." I looked him dead in the eye. "I have no shortage of time. I only care about the result." Arthur nodded slowly. "Understood. I will get to work immediately." As soon as he left, my phone rang again. This time, it was my best friend. "Sarah. Maddie. Well, is it finalized?" Her voice was buzzing with excitement. "Yes, thank God. Finally, dinner tonight. It's on me." She laughed loudly. "Deal." "Oh. By the way, did you cut off the funding for that brat?" "Victoria. Cut it off completely. The girl is probably losing her mind right now. She already called me 3 times, screaming into the phone. Stay strong," Sarah said. Then she laughed hard. "Serves her right. She always looked at you like a walking ATM." I stayed quiet for a moment. It's not that I didn't know what she was doing. I just used to do it voluntarily. "Maddie." Sarah's voice suddenly grew serious. "Are you okay?" I looked out the window. The sun wasn't beating down quite so harshly anymore. "I'm fine." It was a short answer, but for the first time, it was the absolute truth. "Good," Sarah said. "Now it's his turn to pay the bill." I didn't reply. I just smiled faintly and hung up. The rest of the day flew by, just as I expected. By the end of the business day, the first headlines started dropping. Vance Holdings faces critical cash gap. Partners pause cooperation. Banks review credit terms. I sat in front of my monitor, reading line by line. My eyes were completely calm. My phone vibrated. It was Vance calling. I looked at the screen, let it ring out, and then declined it. Immediately after, a flood of text messages poured in. Madeline, are you behind this? Why did they pause the investments? Pick up the phone. We need to talk. I read them all and deleted them without replying. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again, this time from a different number. I answered. Madeline. What the hell are you doing? Vance's voice was hoarse. He had clearly lost his grip. What are you talking about? I asked softly. The investments, the banks, the partners, all of it at once. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? I leaned back in my executive chair. Your company is going through a rough patch. Why are you asking me? Don't play dumb with me, he roared. Madeline. We were husband and wife. Did you really have to push it this far? I stayed silent for a few seconds. Then I asked him a question of my own. When you were draining all the assets to leave me with nothing, did you think about the fact that we were husband and wife? Dead silence on the other end of the line. When you brought another woman into your office, into hotels, did you think about the fact that we were husband and wife? Maddie, when you sent thugs to block my car, to intimidate me, did you think about the fact that we were husband and wife? I cut him off. My voice wasn't loud, but every word seemed to shatter the silence. The line went completely dead. After a long, agonizing pause, Vance's voice dropped low. What do you want? Finally, he asked the right question. I looked at the sky outside my window. The sunset was already gathering. You'll find out soon enough, I said, and I hung up, denying him even a single extra second of my time. That evening, I stood alone in my office. The city turned its lights on. A brilliant sea of artificial stars stretched out below me. I picked up a glass of wine and swirled it gently. The dark red liquid spun, reflecting the flickering city lights. 5 years. I used to think that if I just tried a little harder, if I just endured a little longer, everything would fall into place. But it turns out, there are some people in this world who will take every sacrifice you make and treat it as their birthright. I took a sip of the wine. Bitter, but satisfying. My phone screen lit up. A new news alert: Vance Holdings officially denied a $7 million credit extension. I smiled. Vance, I told you, this is only the beginning. Outside, the city glowed. Inside me, one door had firmly closed, and another was slowly beginning to swing open. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I was rushing to get to work, but because of a strange sense of lightness, a clarity of mind that wouldn't let me relax for a single second. I knew perfectly well that yesterday's events were just the prelude. The real, massive shockwaves were still coming, and if I didn't maintain my momentum, I could easily get swept backward. I brewed a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the balcony, looking at the still sleepy city. The first rays of the sun painted the rooftops in pale gold. Images from the last 5 years flashed through my mind. Every sum of money transferred, every compromise made, every time I turned a blind eye to the truth, and every time I convinced myself, just endure it a little longer. I closed my eyes. No more enduring. My phone rang. It was Andrew. Ms. Madeline. Massive panic over at Vance's company this morning. I wasn't surprised. Go, Juan. The bank has officially issued a notice of debt collection. Several partners have also started demanding immediate payment. Right now, there is a crowd of suppliers gathered outside their office doors, demanding their money. I took a sip of coffee. My voice remained completely steady. Has it hit the media yet? Yes. All the major financial and business outlets have published the story. It's spreading fast. Keep feeding the coverage. Yes. Mom. I hung up. Everything was going exactly according to my plan. Not a second too fast. Not a second too slow. Right on schedule. I got dressed and arrived at the office earlier than usual, barely stepping into the lobby. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The employees were moving faster, speaking quieter. Everyone knew something massive was happening. Even if no one said it out loud. Ms. Madeline. Leah approached me. Her face was dead serious. Someone from Vance's company is here. He wants to see you. I didn't break my stride. I'm not taking meetings. It's his chief financial officer. Then I'm definitely not taking the meeting. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, leaving me alone. Sometimes, silence is the clearest answer you can give. When I reached my floor and stepped out of the elevator, my phone started vibrating relentlessly. It was Vance. I looked at the screen and let it ring. Then, the text messages flooded in. Madeline, I know it's you. The company is in critical condition. Don't take this too far. Let's talk. I read them all, placed my phone face down on the desk, and didn't reply. A few minutes later, another call came through. This time, it was from his mother. I hesitated for a second, then answered. Madeline, what on earth are you doing? Eleanor's voice was shrill and vibrating with rage. Vance's company is about to collapse, and you cut off Victoria's funding. Are you trying to drive our entire family to our graves? I stood by the window, watching the traffic flow below. Eleanor, I said slowly, Vance and I are divorced. So what if you're divorced? You're still Victoria's sister-in-law. She's all alone out there. Who's going to take care of her if not you? I laughed softly. Sister-in-law. Even in a moment like this, she still had the nerve to use that word. You're mistaken. My voice was calm, but ice cold. As of yesterday, I am no longer a member of your family. From this moment on, Vance and Victoria's problems have absolutely nothing to do with me. There was silence on the line for a second. Then her tone turned vicious. I knew you were a rotten person. So sweet on the outside, but nothing but a calculating snake on the inside. You are ruining my son. I listened without interrupting. When she finally finished her rant, I answered softly, Eleanor. Do you actually know how Vance's company started? She went quiet. Of course I do. He built it himself. With the $50,000 I gave him after I downsized my condo to invest in his business. I enunciated every single word clearly. And do you know where he got his first major contract? Dead silence on the other end. I used my father's connections. Silence. I continued. My voice didn't rise, but every word was razor sharp. His company was on the verge of bankruptcy 3 times, and every single time, I was the one who injected the capital to save it. You say I'm a rotten person. Then what have I been for the last 5 years? She couldn't find a single word to say back. After a long, painful pause, her voice weakened. That was your duty as his wife. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. No, I said, that was charity. I hung up the phone. No more words were needed. There are some people in this world who will never understand, no matter how much you explain it to them. Or they do understand, but they just refuse to admit it. By noon, the news had blown up. Vance Holdings on the brink of bankruptcy. Employees unpaid for 2 months. Partners withdrawing capital en masse. I sat in my office reading the headlines. I felt no malicious joy, no triumph, just absolute peace. I knew this wasn't revenge. It was just a result. The result of his own actions. Right at that moment, my office door opened. Leah walked in. Her voice was slightly anxious. Ms. Madeline, Vance is downstairs. I looked up. He says he absolutely has to see you. I stayed quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. Send him up? Leah looked surprised. Yes, send him up. I repeated. Understood. I spun my chair around, resting my hands on the desk. It was time. The door opened, And Vance walked in just one day. He looked like a completely different person. His suit was wrinkled. His tie was crooked. His eyes were bloodshot with deep, dark circles under them. He radiated a kind of exhaustion and panic I had never seen in him before. He stood in front of my desk in silence, just staring at me, as if trying to find the woman he thought he knew so well. "Sit down," I said. He didn't sit. "Madeline, do you really want to push it this far?" His voice was hoarse. I looked at him without answering. He took a step forward. "The company is everything I have. You know that if it collapses, I'll have nothing left." I tilted my head slightly. "And so what if you have nothing left?" He froze. He clearly hadn't expected that question. "Maddie." He lowered his voice. "We were husband and wife." I laughed softly. "You still remember that one question?" It made him choke on his breath. I stood up and walked slowly toward him. "Vance." I looked him dead in the eye. "If I hadn't reacted yesterday, what would I be right now?" He stayed silent, left with nothing. I answered for him. No money, no house, no company, and a ruined reputation on top of it all. I paused. "Did you ever think about that?" He clenched his fists. I could have compensated you." "Compensated me?" I scoffed. "With what?" He said nothing. I turned away and walked toward the window. "You didn't come here to apologize," I said. "You came here to beg for money." The air in the room grew thick. He didn't argue, because he knew it was the truth. After a long time, he finally spoke. "Madeline, what do you want?" I turned around and looked at him. There wasn't a single drop of sympathy in my eyes. "You'll find out soon enough," I said. "But not today." I pressed the intercom button. Leah walked in. "Show Vance out." Vance stood there, looking like he wanted to say something else, but ultimately kept his mouth shut. He turned around and walked out. The door closed, and silence filled the office once again. I stood there, staring at the empty space in front of me. No joy, no sadness, just the end of one chapter of my life. And the beginning of another. When the door closed behind Vance, I stayed frozen for a moment, just staring straight ahead, not out of hesitation, but to make absolutely sure that there were no lingering emotions left in my soul that could make me back down. I knew perfectly well that from this moment on, there was no turning back. "Ms. Madeline?" Leah stood nearby, lowering her voice. "Should I keep monitoring the situation at Vance's company?" I shook my head slightly. "No need to monitor it." I walked back to my chair. "Just keep me in the loop. Only people who are still attached need to monitor things. I just need to know the facts to maintain control." Leah nodded. "Understood." She turned to leave. But the intercom on my desk rang. I picked up the receiver. "Ms. Madeline, the bank wants to confirm some details regarding the credit lines for Vance's company." It was Andrew. His voice was sharp and decisive. "What's their situation?" "They've officially been downgraded to a high-risk group. If there is no cash influx within 72 hours, the asset seizure process will begin." I paused for a second. 72 hours. 3 days. Exactly enough time for the company to either miraculously stand its ground or collapse completely. "Change nothing," I said. "We do not interfere." "Got it." I hung up the phone. In my head, the numbers and deadlines laid themselves out like a map. I didn't need to guess. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. That evening, I left work earlier than usual, not to rest, but to visit a place I hadn't been to in a very long time. The old apartment building where my mother used to live. The iron gates to the courtyard were just as old as I remembered. The paint was peeling. Ivy crawled up the corner of the brick wall. Almost nothing had changed. Only the person who used to live inside was no longer there. I pushed open the door to the stairwell and walked in. Silence. The smell of old wood, time, and memories. I walked slowly through the rooms, running my hand along the faded wallpaper, the image of my mother sitting by the window, meticulously sewing stitch by stitch, flashed in my mind. Maddie. Money isn't the most important thing in the world. Her voice seemed to echo in the room. But if you have it, never let anyone use it to hold you down. I stopped, closing my eyes softly. Back then, I didn't fully understand what she meant. Now, I did. I walked into my mother's old bedroom, opened the dresser drawer, and took out a small wooden box. Inside were documents, property deeds, contracts, and wills. I hadn't opened it in all these years, not because I was afraid, but because I hadn't needed to. But today, I opened it. Every line of text was clear and precise. My mother had left all her assets to me, including this apartment, and a block of shares in a company that Vance never even knew about. I chuckled softly, very softly. It turned out that from the very beginning, I had possessed so much more than he ever realized. I had simply chosen to stay quiet. I closed the box and took it with me. By the time I left the building, dusk had already fallen. The streetlights flickered on, washing the quiet street in pale gold. I stopped at the gate for a moment and looked back. I understand now. Mom, I whispered, and I kept walking. That night, I didn't go back to my apartment. I went to a high-end rooftop restaurant with panoramic views of the entire city. Sarah was already waiting for me. Finally, she waved at me. I walked over and sat down. You look different, Sarah said, eyeing me from head to toe. Different how? You don't have that stupid, long-suffering look on your face anymore. I laughed out loud. Sounds harsh, but it's true. Sarah shrugged. You put up with so much crap for him. Just thinking about it still pisses me off. I didn't argue, because she was right. The waiter brought our food. We ate and talked. The atmosphere was so much more relaxed than it had been in days. Listen. Sarah put her fork down. How far are you planning to take this? I set my wine glass down. Until he understands. Until he realizes that you can't just take everything without eventually paying the price. Sarah was quiet for a few seconds. Then she nodded. Fair enough. My phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. I am the manager at Chase Bank. We would like to discuss the debt obligations of Vance Holdings with you. I read the text and smiled. The fish had taken the bait. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What are you plotting? I didn't answer immediately. I just looked out the window at the glittering city lights. Tomorrow, everything will become clear, I said. The next morning, I arrived at the bank for the scheduled meeting. A spacious conference room, cold, white fluorescent lights. A middle-aged man in a sharp suit stood up when I walked in. Ms. Madeline. He extended his hand. My name is Oliver Hayes. I shook his hand and sat down. We've reviewed the portfolio for Vance Holdings. He began, without beating around the bush. The situation is extremely dire. I know. We wanted to ask if you intend to participate in a restructuring plan. I looked at him. On what conditions? He smiled faintly. You would gain full controlling interest of the company. I wasn't surprised. This was the exact next step. And Vance will be removed from all executive management. I leaned back in my chair, stayed quiet for a few seconds, and then said I agree. One short answer, but it was enough. The game had officially entered its next phase. When I walked out of the bank, my phone rang. It was Vance. This time, I answered. Madeline, you met with the bank reps, didn't you? His voice was frantic. Yes. What? What are you planning to do? I stopped on the sidewalk, watching the pedestrians walk by. You'll find out soon enough. Madeline. Don't you dare. Goodbye. Vance. I hung up the phone, refusing to let him finish his sentence. A light breeze blew past. I kept walking. Every step was confident. Without looking back, after leaving the bank, I didn't go straight back to the office. Instead, I took a long walk down a familiar avenue. The morning breeze carried a slight chill, just enough to clear my head and map out the next steps of a plan I had been forming for a long time. Today, it was all finally coming to the surface. My phone vibrated nonstop, without even looking. I knew who it was. Vance. I didn't answer, not because I was avoiding him, but because the timing wasn't right yet. Some answers need to be made to wait in order to carry true weight. As soon as I walked into the lobby of my company, Leah rushed up to me. Her face was tense. Ms. Madeline. Things blew up over at Vance's company this morning. I stopped walking. Go on. The employees gathered at the entrance. They're demanding their back pay. Some of them are quitting on the spot. The local news crews are already there. I nodded slightly. It was no surprise. When a company's cash flow is choked off, the first explosion always comes from the inside. The bank already sent the official default notice, I asked. Yes. Sent this morning. Further actions will likely begin today or tomorrow. I stepped into the elevator. Prepare the documents. Leah understood exactly what I meant. Yes. Ma'am. The elevator doors slid shut. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored surface, a woman with a straight back and an unwavering gaze, completely unrecognizable from the version of myself who used to let a single phone call from Vance ruin her entire day. I exhaled softly, not out of exhaustion, but out of pure relief that I had finally broken free. I walked into my office. Before I could even sit down, my phone rang. This time, I answered. Madeline. Vance's voice was almost a scream. What the hell do you want? I placed the phone on my desk and put him on speaker. My voice was dead calm. You're losing control. Don't lecture me, he roared. The employees are striking. The bank is calling in the debt. Partners are tearing up their contracts. All at the exact same time. If you aren't behind this, then who is? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked him a question. Have you ever stopped to wonder why all of this is happening at the exact same time? Dead silence on his end. Then, a cold, bitter laugh. Stop talking in circles. Spit it out. I leaned back in my chair. Because your foundation has been rotting for years. The air on the other side of the line seemed to freeze. I continued in a perfectly level tone. All I did was remove the support beams. One sentence, it put everything exactly where it belonged. He didn't say a word. I could only hear his heavy breathing. After a long, agonizing wait, his voice dropped lower. Maddie, I know I was wrong. I wasn't surprised. When people are backed into a corner, they say things they never would have dreamed of saying before. I shouldn't have treated you like that. I shouldn't have done any of this. I stayed silent, letting him speak. But, can you give me another chance? In the past, those words might have softened my heart, but now, a chance for what? I asked. To fix everything. I scoffed softly. Do you want to fix everything? Or do you just want to save your company? Dead silence. No answer was needed. I already knew what it was. Yesterday, you called all your partners. I continued. Nobody picked up. You drove to the bank, but they refused to see you. I paused. Do you know why? Because they don't trust you anymore. My voice wasn't loud, but every word was razor sharp. The other end of the line was dead quiet. After a long time, he finally spoke. Madeline, what do you want me to do? I looked out the window. The sun was high in the sky. Come to my office this afternoon, I said. Alone. I hung up, giving him zero room to argue. At exactly 3:00 p.m., Vance showed up. He didn't look as frantic as he had in the morning, but pure exhaustion was etched into his face. That old arrogance in his eyes was gone, replaced by something closely resembling surrender. He walked into my office and stood there without saying a word. I thought you wouldn't come, I said. I didn't have a choice, he replied. I nodded. Sit down. He sat down, resting his hands on his knees, his head slightly bowed. It was the first time I had ever seen him in a posture below mine. Not because I forced him into it, but because he had driven himself there. I'll get straight to the point, I began. The bank agreed to let me participate in the restructuring of your company. His head snapped up. on the condition that I receive controlling interest. The air in the room froze. He stared at me, refusing to believe his ears. And you, I continued, will step down as CEO. Impossible. He jumped to his feet. That is my company. Was yours? I corrected. One word. But it changed everything. He stood there, breathing heavily. Madeline. Are you stealing it from me? No. I looked at him. I am taking back what was already mine. He froze. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and slid it across the desk toward him. Take a look. He picked it up and started flipping through the pages. His face changed by the second. That is the proof of every single investment I made into your company, I said, including the ones you kept off the official books. He stayed completely silent. The total amount, I continued, is over $5 million. Absolute silence fell over the room. He slowly lowered the folder. His hand was trembling slightly. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. I looked him dead in the eye. Because you never bothered to ask. One simple sentence, but it carried so much weight that there was no arguing against it. He slumped back down into his chair, burying his face in his hands. His voice came out raspy and broken. Do you really want to destroy me completely? I waited a few seconds. Then I said, no. He looked up. I'm giving you a way out. I pushed another document toward him. Sign this. You walk away from the company. But in exchange, you are cleared of all corporate debt obligations. He stared at me. A violent struggle waged in his eyes. And if you don't sign it, I said, in 3 days, the company goes bankrupt. And you lose absolutely everything. It wasn't a threat. It was simply a statement of fact. He lowered his head and stayed silent for a very long time. So long that I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, he picked up the pen and signed. One single, decisive stroke, as if severing himself from his past. He put the pen down and sat there in silence. Thank you, I said, taking the documents back. He let out a dry, lifeless laugh. Thank you. He shook his head. Madeline, you've changed. No. I looked at him. I just stopped being the person I used to be. He stood up and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped for a second. He didn't look back. Then, he walked out. The door closed. I sat in silence. No joy, no sadness, only a feeling of incredible lightness. A lightness I had been waiting 5 years to feel. When the door closed behind Vance, it wasn't just the end of a meeting. It was a period, a hard, definitive period on a sentence that had dragged on for 5 long years. I sat there for a while, my hand resting on the signed documents. I looked at the fresh ink, and my soul felt entirely at peace. Not because I had become heartless, but because every emotion I could have possibly felt for him had dried up a long time ago. Ms. Madeline. Leah knocked and walked in. The bank just sent confirmation. The transfer process will begin this afternoon. I nodded. Prepare the main conference room. I will be attending personally. Yes. Mom. Leah left. I stood up, adjusted my blazer, and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. My gaze was the same. Calm. Clear. Unwavering. This was no longer personal. This was strictly business. Later that afternoon, the lights were blazing in the main conference room on the top floor. The atmosphere was so serious that almost no one spoke, except to discuss the agenda. The bank representatives, my lawyer Arthur Sterling, my financial team, and several top executives from Vance's company were all present. The only person missing was Vance himself. I didn't ask why. I knew his role in this room was officially over. Let's begin. My voice rang out clearly. The documents were opened. Every clause was read aloud. Every number was verified. Everything moved quickly. But strictly, not a single detail was overlooked. I sat at the head of the table. I didn't speak much, but every word I said was a final decision. The $7 million debt will be restructured. Oliver Hayes, the bank rep, stated, under the condition that new capital is injected into the company and executive management changes. I take full responsibility for that, I replied, and all executive authority transfers to you. Ms. Madeline. Correct. Correct. No one argued. They all knew there was no other choice. The meeting lasted almost 3 hours. By the time everything was finalized, it was already dark outside. The city lights flickered on. Reflecting against the thick glass windows of the conference room, I signed the final document and put down my pen. A very clear feeling washed over me. Not a feeling of victory, but of closure. One chapter was officially closed. Congratulations, Ms. Madeline, Arthur Sterling said, a hint of relief in his voice. From this moment on, it is entirely in your hands. I nodded. Thank you, Arthur. Everyone filed out of the room one by one. The space slowly emptied. I sat there for a few more minutes, looking out at the glittering lights. It looked like a painting that never froze in place. My phone vibrated. An unknown number. I answered. Ms. Madeline. A familiar voice. Victoria. Why are you calling? I asked bluntly. There was a second of silence on the line, followed by the sound of crying. Maddie. Please transfer me some money. I'm about to get kicked out of school. Her voice wasn't shrill and demanding like last time. Now, it was shaking and terrified. I called Vance, but he doesn't have any money. I wasn't surprised. Victoria, I said. How old are you? 22. Right. And until what age do you think it is my obligation to financially support you? Silence on the other end. Only the sound of her sniffling. But you always did. In the past, that was my voluntary decision. I cut her off. Now, it is not. A long pause followed. Ms. Madeline. Her voice grew quieter. I don't know what to do. I closed my eyes for a second, not out of pity, but to think, I am not going to wire you money, I said, pausing, but I can give you one option. The crying stopped instantly. What is it? Get a job? Part-time or full-time? You are an adult. But I'm studying. I just took controlling interest of your brother's company, I stated calmly. If you want, I can offer you a job at our branch over there. Total silence. She probably couldn't believe her ears. Earn your own money. Pay for your own school. I continued. No one is going to hand you a free ride anymore. After a very long time, Victoria asked quietly, Maddie, are you really never going to help me again? I opened my eyes and looked out at the city. No. I hung up the phone without hesitation. There are some people who will never learn how to stand on their own 2 feet unless you stop propping them up. That evening, I got home quite late. The apartment was dead quiet. No more relentless text messages. No more high-pressure phone calls. I dropped my bag, walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned silently against the counter. The silence that used to terrify me now felt like a luxury. My phone lit up. A text from an unsaved number, Madeline. It's Vance. I looked at it but didn't reply. Another text came through. I moved out of the office. I have nothing left. Tonight, I'm sitting in our old bar. I don't know why I'm writing to you. But the message cut off there. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then locked the phone. I didn't drive there. I didn't reply. I didn't go back. I stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was chilly, but it didn't make me shiver anymore. I stood there, looking down at the city. The lights were still burning bright. The stream of traffic never stopped. Everything was moving forward. Even if someone loses everything, the world doesn't stop spinning. And neither do I. I walked back inside and closed the sliding door. The day was over. No more lingering ties. No more obligations. It was just me. The next morning, I woke up a little later than usual. Not because I was exhausted, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't jolted awake by that invisible, crushing weight on my chest. I didn't feel the sudden panic to grab my phone and check if Vance's company had an emergency, if he needed a cash bailout, or if his mother had called again to complain. Instead, there was just true, breathing silence, a silence where I could lie in bed for a few extra minutes, watching the sunlight slice through the curtains, and realize that my life had finally settled back into the place it always belonged. I got out of bed, brewed some coffee, and stood by the window, watching the city slowly wake up. My mind wasn't cluttered with tangled financial schemes anymore. Instead, there was a rare, beautiful clarity, like the surface of a lake finally settling after a violent storm, allowing you to see all the way to the bottom, to see the things that had been hidden for so long. My phone rang. It was Leah. Ms. Madeline. Things have mostly stabilized at the new company this morning. However, some of Vance's old management team are refusing to cooperate. I wasn't surprised. Any shift in power inevitably triggers a reaction, especially from people who are used to standing above others, and are now forced to answer to the very person they used to look down on. Send me a list of their names. My voice was calm but decisive. Anyone who refuses to cooperate gets fired. Leah went quiet for a second, then replied, "Understood." I hung up and took a sip of my coffee. The bitterness spread across my tongue. But it wasn't unpleasant anymore, because this time, I had chosen the bitterness myself. It hadn't been shoved down my throat. When I arrived at the office, the atmosphere felt entirely different from the previous days. The chaos was gone. The bewildered glances were gone. In their place were caution, observation, and even respect. I walked through the lobby, and every single employee stood up to greet me. It wasn't overly dramatic, but it was enough to show that my position was firmly established. Ms. Madeline, a middle-aged manager, approached me. His voice was slightly hesitant. "We'd like to know your plans moving forward." I stopped and looked at him. "First, stabilization," I said. "Then, growth." He nodded, but worry still lingered in his eyes. "And regarding Vance, he has nothing to do with this company anymore." I looked him straight in the eye. One short sentence to cut off all rumors. I walked into my new office, Vance's old office. The layout was the same. The furniture was the same. The only thing that had changed was the person sitting in the chair. I set my bag down and slowly sat behind the desk. I ran my hand over the polished wood where he used to sit with such arrogant certainty. Now, there was only empty space, not because I had wanted to steal this seat, but because it had finally returned to where it belonged. At noon, while I was reviewing reports, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Maddie, I just heard the news." "What news? Did you seriously take over his entire company?" I chuckled softly. "Yes." "Oh my God. I thought you were just trying to scare him." "You actually did it." "It wasn't a bluff," I said. "It was a business plan." Sarah stayed quiet for a few seconds, then laughed. "Serves him right. What about you? Do you feel better?" I looked out the window. The sunlight was flooding the room, but it wasn't blinding. "Better," I replied. "Better than I ever thought I would." After hanging up, I went back to work. The numbers, the projections, everything was clear. Nothing relied on emotions anymore. I didn't have to walk on eggshells to protect someone else's ego. Everything was back to basics: logic, pragmatism, and transparency. Towards evening, Leah walked in. She looked a little hesitant. "Ms. Madeline, you have a visitor." "Who?" "Vance." I wasn't surprised. "What does he want?" "He says it's for one last meeting." I stayed quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. "Let him in." Not because I wanted to see him, but because some things need to be seen all the way to the end. Vance walked in. This time, there was no flawless, tailored suit, just a simple, slightly wrinkled dress shirt. His face was drawn, There was no fight left in his eyes, only exhaustion and surrender. He stood in front of my desk. He didn't sit. "I won't take up much of your time," he said quietly. I stayed silent, waiting. I just wanted to ask one question. I gave a slight nod. If I hadn't done all those things back then, would everything be different right now? It was a very simple question, but asked far too late. I looked at him without breaking eye contact. "Yes," I answered. "Completely different." He scoffed. A very quiet, incredibly bitter scoff. That's what I thought. The pause dragged out for a few seconds. Then, he spoke even softer. "Madeline, I'm sorry. I didn't react. Not because I didn't hear him, but because that apology should have been spoken a very long time ago. I know saying it now is pointless," he continued, "but I still needed to say it." I looked at him and gave a slow nod. "Okay." One word. Not forgiveness, but not resentment either. Just an acknowledgement. He stood there for a few more seconds, then turned around. Just before walking out, he stopped. "Madeline." He didn't look back. "I'll handle everything else on my own." I didn't reply. The door closed. This time, truly, for the last time, I sat there, looking at the empty space in front of me. There were no ripples in my soul, no malicious joy, no regret, just a deep, profound peace, like walking a very long, brutal road, and finally being able to stop without ever needing to look over your shoulder again. Outside, dusk was settling in. The city was turning on its lights once more. Another day was over, but this time, it wasn't the end of a long chain of suffering. It was the continuation of a new life. A life where I was no longer standing in someone else's shadow, where I was no longer carrying someone else's dead weight. A life where I finally chose my own path. I stood up and walked out of the office. The fluorescent lights in the hallway were bright. Every step I took was confident. Steady. Not fast. Just moving at my own perfect rhythm. After Vance left, I didn't go right back to my desk. I stood in the hallway for a moment. The white fluorescent lights cast a straight, unwavering line across the floor just like the path I was walking now. Clear, decisive, with no room for the doubts that had held me back for so long. I took a deep breath and kept walking. Every step wasn't rushed, but it was certain, as if I had planned this exact movement years ago. Over the next few days, the company steadily stabilized, not by slapping a bandage over the issues, but by fundamentally fixing them. Every department was audited. Every expense became transparent. The right people were put into the right positions. I didn't try to change everything overnight. I knew that things built too quickly can collapse just as easily. So I chose a slow, reliable path, step by step. Just like my mother used to teach me when she was sewing, keep your stitches even and smooth. That's how the fabric holds together. Ms. Madeline. Leah handed me a binder of reports. Our financial standing has improved this week. Cash flow is starting to recover. I flipped through the pages. The numbers were no longer screaming in the red. They were slowly finding their balance. There was even a slight upward trend. A small change, but enough to prove one thing: the direction was right. "We keep this pace," I said. "No need to rush." Leah nodded. "Yes, Ma'am." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "By the way, there's news about Vance." I stopped writing. "What is it?" "He sold his apartment, moved out, and I heard he's looking for a job." I stayed quiet for a few seconds. I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't entirely indifferent either. "Okay," I said. One word. No more questions. No further comments. Leah understood. And without another word, she left my office. I went back to my work, but an image of the old Vance flashed through my mind. A man who was so utterly convinced that he held the world in the palm of his hand, and then, in just a few short days, everything crumbled. Not because someone else destroyed it, but because the foundation was rotten to begin with. That evening, I left work a little early, not because of any urgent plans, but simply because I felt like taking a drive. No destination, no schedule, just cruising slowly through familiar streets, watching pedestrians and strangers' faces pass by. It reminded me that life doesn't revolve around any single person, whether you lose everything or gain the world. Life keeps moving forward without waiting for you. I pulled over at a small coffee shop. I walked in, found a quiet corner, ordered an espresso, and just sat there, doing nothing, just staring out the window as the evening shadows deepened. Watching silhouettes blur past, everyone has their own story, their own life. No one truly knows anyone else. And no one really needs to. My phone vibrated. A text message from Victoria. I opened it. Ms. Madeline. I got the job. I didn't reply immediately. Another message popped up. I'm working at a diner. The pay isn't great, but I'm going to work hard. I stared at the screen for a few more seconds, then typed back. Good. One word. No encouragement. No scolding, but it was enough. Enough for her to understand that from now on, she had to walk her own path. I put my phone down and took a sip of espresso. The familiar bitterness hit my tongue. But this time, there was a faint, sweet aftertaste. Very faint, but absolutely real. By the time I got back to my apartment, the city lights were in full blaze. The glow from neighboring high-rises spilled onto my balcony, painting intricate patterns of light and shadow. I stepped outside and stood there for a while. The night breeze brushed lightly against my hair. It was cool, but not freezing. It felt nice. I leaned against the railing, looking down at the endless river of traffic. It looked just like time itself, constantly moving forward. My phone screen lit up again. Another message. Not from Vance. Not from Victoria. It was from an old number I hadn't contacted in years. Madeline. It's your father's old friend. Nicholas. I froze for a second. I just moved back to the States and heard about what happened. I'd love to meet up with you. I stared at the text. It was a strange feeling. Not anxiety. Not curiosity, but the distinct sensation of yet another door opening. I didn't reply right away. I just stood there, looking out at the city. An image of my late father surfaced in my mind. The man was gone, but the connections he had forged were still quietly alive in the background, just like the things my mother had left me. Unobtrusive, but strong enough to become an anchor exactly when I needed one. I took a deep breath and texted back. Yes, whenever you are free. I hit send and set my phone down. My gaze drifted back out to the horizon, where the city lights melted into an endless glowing band. My life wasn't stopping here. It didn't end with a divorce. It didn't end with taking back what was stolen from me. It was continuing, but this time, it wasn't for anyone else. It was strictly for me. I smiled softly in the dark, very softly, but completely genuine. The message from the man who called himself my father's friend sat quietly on my phone screen, unrushed, unpressured, but it created a deep enough pause for me to realize something important. Life never truly stops at a dead end. It always opens new paths at the exact moment you think all the doors have been locked shut. I stayed on the balcony for a little while longer, letting the night wind wash over me, giving myself permission to slow down, not out of hesitation, but so that I could take my next step with absolute clarity, unburdened by the past and unswayed by fleeting emotions. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. The atmosphere was already remarkably stable. The cautious glances had been replaced by focused energy. The departments were operating in sync. The financial reports were no longer a chaotic mess. A real system had been put into place. I walked through the bullpen. I didn't say much, but my mere presence seemed enough to set everyone into a productive rhythm. Ms. Madeline. Leah walked up to me, holding a tablet. The meeting with the bank is confirmed for today, at 3:00 p.m. Good. And about that man, your father's friend, when are you planning to meet with him? I paused for a moment. This evening. Leah nodded, without asking any unnecessary questions. She walked away. She understood that some things didn't require much discussion. The morning flew by. I worked without taking a break. Every decision was made without hesitation. Without the exhausting mental gymnastics of worrying about how it would affect someone else's ego, there was only one metric now. Is it the right move? Or not? Is it profitable? Or not? That pure clarity made everything easier. Even if the workload hadn't decreased. In the afternoon, the meeting at the bank went smoothly. The restructuring terms were already showing positive results. Cash flow was under control. Partner confidence was returning not because of what I was saying, but because of what they saw me doing. Ms. Madeline? Oliver Hayes said. His voice was much more relaxed than during our first meeting. If we maintain this momentum, the company will be fully recovered in just 3 months. I nodded. We don't need fast, I said. We need solid. He smiled. That is a trait very few people possess. I didn't reply. I just gathered my documents, stood up, and shook his hand. Concluding the meeting, when I stepped out of the bank, dusk had already fallen. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the designated address, an old, classic tea house, tucked away in a quiet alley. Not overly luxurious, but steeped in a deeply familiar atmosphere. Exactly the kind of place my father used to love. I walked in, scanned the room, and spotted an older gentleman sitting in a corner booth. He stood up when he saw me. There was emotion in his eyes, but he maintained a calm demeanor. Madeline. His voice was deep and steady. I walked over and gave a respectful nod. Hello, Uncle Nicholas. We sat down. It was a little awkward at first, not because we were strangers, but because we were both trying to re-establish a connection that had been buried for years. I'm sorry, I only reached out to you now, he said. I shook my head. It's okay. He looked at me and let out a soft sigh. You look just like your mother. I stayed quiet. It wasn't the first time I had heard that, but hearing it now felt different. I know everything, he continued. About your marriage, about the company, and about what you did. I didn't ask how he knew. It didn't matter. Before your father passed away, he asked me for one favor. I tensed slightly. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an old, sealed envelope, and placed it on the table. He told me, if she ever needs it, give this to her. I stared at the envelope. I didn't rush to open it. What is it? Shares, he said. In a holding firm your father invested in a very long time ago, but he never listed himself as the official owner. I looked at him, unable to hide my surprise. How much? He chuckled softly. Enough so that you will never have to fight anyone for survival ever again. The air in the room grew heavy. I opened the envelope. Inside were officially notarized legal documents, and a number that made me fall completely silent for several seconds. Not out of greed, but because I finally realized that my father had never truly left me to fend for myself. I folded the documents and placed them back on the table. Uncle Nicholas, could you hold on to these for me for a while? He looked at me, surprised. You don't want them right now. No, I said, but I know they are there. He nodded slowly. A deep sense of satisfaction appeared in his eyes. You grew up much faster than I expected. I smiled faintly. I just learned from what happened. We talked for a little while longer. Not a long conversation, but enough to fill the void of so many missing years. When I walked out of the tea house, it was completely dark. The streetlights reflected off the pavement, wet from a brief, passing rain shower. I walked slowly to my car. My heart didn't feel heavy, nor did it feel light. It felt perfectly balanced, as if everything had finally clicked into its rightful place. My phone vibrated. A text from Vance. I found a job. I looked at it but didn't reply. The next text came through. It's an entry-level position, but it's enough to live on. I read it and locked my screen. Not out of coldness, but because there was simply no reason to continue the dialogue. I got into my car and started the engine. The car merged smoothly onto the brightly lit avenue, My mind was no longer haunted by ghosts of the past, no more what ifs. There was only the road ahead. Life wasn't stopping, and neither was I. After my meeting with Nicholas, my father's old friend, I didn't take the envelope of documents home with me, not because I didn't value it, but because I realized something crucial. Some things don't need to be tightly gripped in your hands for you to know they belong to you. And sometimes, refusing immediate possession allows you to see their true worth much more clearly. I drove slowly down the familiar avenues. The glow of the streetlights washed over the windshield in endless, glowing streaks. My mind wasn't cluttered with dense calculations or heavy strategies anymore. Instead, there was a profound quiet, a silence deep enough for me to ask myself a real question. If it hadn't been for this entire collapse, would I have ever broken out of the vicious cycle I locked myself in for so many years? The next morning, when I stepped into the office, the atmosphere had absolutely nothing in common with the chaos of those first few days. Everything had fallen into order, not through intimidation, but through the solid stability created by clear, decisive leadership. I walked past the cubicles. I heard the steady, productive hum of business calls. The frantic, confused whispering was gone. It made me realize that change doesn't need to be loud to be effective. Ms. Madeline. Leah approached me. Her voice was light and upbeat. Our Korean partners just confirmed they are renewing the contract. They said they have full confidence in your management style. I nodded without showing too much emotion. Prepare the paperwork. Yes. Mom. Leah turned to leave but stopped for a second. Oh. Right. One more thing. I looked at her. Victoria sent an email to HR. I froze slightly. What kind of email? She's applying for an internship at our London branch. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then I reached out for the tablet Leah was holding. I opened the email. The tone wasn't demanding or entitled like it used to be. It was polite, clear, and a little subdued. Ms. Madeline, I know I have no right to ask you for any favors, but I want to try. If it's possible, I am willing to start at the absolute lowest entry-level position. I finished reading. No pity, no coldness, just logic. Accept it, I said. Leah looked surprised. Yes, Mom. Through the standard hiring process, no special privileges. Understood. I handed the tablet back. Some lessons are only learned when you pay the price yourself. But if someone truly wants to change, it's worth giving them a chance to start over. Not for their sake, but for your own, so you don't have to carry the weight of resentment forever. At noon, while I was reviewing an expansion proposal, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. Madeline, it's me, your former mother-in-law. I froze for a second. Eleanor's voice wasn't shrill and venomous like it was last time. It was quiet and very tired. Did something happen? I asked. I'd like to meet with you. I didn't answer right away. Not because I felt awkward, but because I was weighing the options. Was there any point to this meeting? Just this once, she added quickly. I promise I will never bother you again. I looked out the window. The midday sun was shining bright. But it wasn't blinding. This afternoon, I said. At the old coffee shop. Okay. She hung up. At the agreed time, I arrived first. I ordered a glass of water and waited. Soon, she walked in. She was the same woman, but noticeably thinner. The harsh, judgmental edge to her face was gone, replaced by naked exhaustion. Madeline, she greeted me. I stood up and gave a slight nod. Eleanor. We sat down. At first, we just sat in silence. Not because we had nothing to say, but because so much had happened that neither of us knew where to begin. I'm sorry, she finally said. I wasn't surprised. But I didn't react either. I said a lot of terrible things to you in the past. I looked at her, letting her speak without interrupting. I thought that just because you had money, you were obligated to fix everything. I never stopped to think that it was your choice to help. Her voice dropped lower. It was only when Vance lost absolutely everything that I finally understood. I let out a soft breath. Not out of relief, but acceptance. I didn't call you to ask for money, she added quickly, as if terrified I would misunderstand. I just wanted to tell you one thing. I waited. Thank you. I stayed silent. Very simple words, but spoken much too late. I don't expect you to forgive us, she continued. I just want you to know that we acknowledge what you did. I understand. I looked at her and gave a slow nod. Okay. Nothing more. Nothing less. She lowered her head. Vance. He's trying to do better. Too. I didn't ask about it. I have no illusions about you ever coming back, she said softly. I just want you to have a good life. I smiled faintly. I already have a good life. She nodded. Her eyes grew slightly damp. She stood up. I'll go now. I didn't ask her to stay. I just sat there and watched her leave. Her silhouette slowly dissolved into the crowd on the street. I felt no malicious joy. No regret. Just a quiet sense of closure. No screaming. No drama. That evening, I got home and unlocked my door. The apartment lights flickered on. A familiar. Quiet space. Free from the noise of the past. I put my bag down and stepped out onto the balcony. Looking out at the city where the lights stretched out like an endless ribbon, my phone lit up. A text from Uncle Nicholas. Madeline? Whenever you are ready, I will transfer everything into your name. I looked at the text and typed back. Yes, but there's no rush. I hit send. Put the phone down. And took a deep breath. There was no need to rush anymore, because for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I was going. The days following the meeting with Vance's mother flowed smoothly. No massive shocks. No sudden plot twists, but the underlying feeling was entirely different. It felt like the sea after a violent hurricane calm, with only gentle ripples reminding you of the storm that had finally passed into history. I continued arriving at the office on time. I handled my responsibilities at a comfortable pace. The hollow void that used to drag my soul down was completely gone. One morning, while I was reviewing a market expansion strategy, Leah walked into my office. Her expression was unusual, not tense, but contemplative. Ms. Madeline, there's something I think you should know. I looked up. Go ahead. Vance was in an accident. I froze for a second. Not out of fear. A bout surprise. Seriously. His life isn't in danger, Leah answered, but he broke his arm. He's in the hospital right now. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. The news didn't hurt me, but it didn't leave me entirely indifferent either. After all, this was a person I had walked a very long road with, even if it ended in ruins. Okay, I said. Understood. Leah nodded. And without another word, she left my office. I went back to my documents. But my focus wasn't entirely on the numbers anymore. An image of the recent Vance flashed through my mind. No longer the arrogant, self-assured CEO, but a man trying to learn how to start from absolute zero, and now, another setback. I put my pen down, looked out the window, and without overthinking it, made a decision. During my lunch break, I left the office early and drove to the hospital. Not out of obligation, not out of lingering feelings, but because I wanted to see everything through to its natural conclusion, to ensure there were no unfinished chapters left in my soul. The long hospital corridor smelled strongly of antiseptic. I walked slowly, asked for his room number, and stopped outside the door with his last name on the placard. I stood there for a second, then pushed the door open without hesitation. Vance was lying in the hospital bed. His arm was in a cast. His face was pale. When he saw me, he froze. He clearly hadn't expected me to show up. Madeline. His voice was raspy. I closed the door and walked over. How are you? I'll live. Minor accident. I nodded, pulled up a chair, and sat down. The air between us was no longer heavy or suffocating. It was just a strange silence, Like two strangers who happen to share a history. I didn't think you'd come, he said. I didn't think I would either, I replied. He smiled faintly. This time, the smile wasn't forced. Thank you. I didn't reply. I just looked at him. How is work? He asked. Good. That's good. We sat in silence. Then, he spoke again. I got a job at a small logistics company. Small, but stable. I offered. Yeah. He chuckled dryly. Nobody calls me boss anymore. But it's not so bad. I looked at him. It was the first time I had ever heard him talk about his life, without a single drop of arrogance. I've been thinking a lot, he continued, his words slowing down, about everything that happened. I didn't interrupt. I used to think that money and status were the only things that mattered. He stared up at the ceiling. But it turns out, those things can't actually hold on to anything real. I let out a soft breath, not in agreement, but in understanding. Madeline. He turned his head to look at me. Are you happy? An unexpected question. I thought about it for a second. Then answered. Slowly, unfiltered. Honestly. Yes. He nodded. His eyes softened. That's good. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't dig into the past. We didn't pick at old wounds. We both understood that what was dead needed to stay buried. I stood up. Get some rest. He nodded. Yeah. I turned and walked toward the door. Just before I stepped out, he called out, Madeline. I stopped. Thank you for not destroying me completely. I didn't look back. I just said, I didn't destroy you. I paused. You did that to yourself. I walked out. The door clicked shut. The corridor was still long and brightly lit. I didn't walk fast. Nor did I walk slow, but my soul felt a little bit lighter. Not because I had forgiven him, but because there was simply nothing left to hold on to. By the time I walked out of the hospital, evening was setting in. The golden light of the sunset stretched across the pavement. I stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and kept walking. My phone vibrated. A message from Leah. Ms. Madeline, the new contract has been officially signed. I read it and smiled softly. Good. One word, but it was enough. Life was moving forward. And this time, I was walking on my own 2 feet. Leaving the hospital, I didn't drive straight back to the office. Instead, I took a slow cruise down a few familiar streets. Not to search for something I had lost, but to feel for myself just how much everything had changed. The very things that used to hurt so badly I couldn't even breathe had now faded into distant memories, memories that no longer possessed the gravity to pull me backward. And this quiet, internal shift made me realize just how incredibly far I had come. In the days that followed, my life settled into a predictable, steady rhythm. Mornings at the office, afternoons in meetings with partners, evenings at home. No more sudden panic-inducing phone calls. No more text messages forcing me to drop everything and run to the rescue. And inside this new routine, I slowly realized something I had never grasped before. Peace doesn't just arrive on its own. It is the direct result of making countless, difficult, decisive choices. Ms. Madeline. Leah walked into my office. Her eyes were glowing. The quarterly report just came in. We're showing a profit. I put down my pen. How much? Small, but highly stable. I nodded, scanning the numbers. The data no longer carried the frantic energy of a corporate rescue mission. Instead, it showed a healthy, functioning system. And in the long run, that was far more important than any massive short-term spike. Maintain the pace. I said, yes, Mom. Leah smiled. This time, there was no underlying tension in her face, just pure trust. She walked out, leaving me alone. The sunlight poured through the window, illuminating my desk and the neat stacks of folders. Suddenly, it hit me. This space had finally, truly become mine. Not because I had seized it by force, but because I had earned it. That afternoon, during my lunch break, my phone rang. It was Victoria. I looked at the caller ID, hesitated for a second, and answered, Ms. Madeline. Her voice wasn't weak and terrified like last time. There was a new trace of confidence in it. Did something happen? I asked. I just wanted to say thank you. I stayed quiet. I'm slowly getting used to the work, she said. It was really hard at first, but I think I can handle it. I didn't respond immediately, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was listening not just to her words, but to the distinct shift in her tone. I would never dare ask you for help again, she continued. I just wanted to tell you that I finally understand. I looked out the window. The midday sun was shining bright. I understand that no one in this world is obligated to support me. Simple words, but they were enough. He gave a soft nod. Even though she couldn't see me. Good. Take care of yourself. You too. I hung up the phone. Nothing more was needed. Some conversations are best ended exactly at the right moment. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Uncle Nicholas. Madeline, I will finalize the paperwork this week. The shares will officially be transferred to your name. I looked at the screen without any surprise, but this time, I didn't delay it. Yes, I'm ready. I hit send and set the phone down. I didn't feel a rush of euphoria, just a very deep calm. I knew this wasn't going to magically change my life. It was just a part of it, a part that I was finally mature enough to accept, without letting it control who I was. The next few days flew by faster than I anticipated. The company entered a phase of solid stability. New projects launched. The team bonded. I no longer needed to micromanage every single detail. I could take a step back, observe, and only course correct when necessary. And taking that step back gave me the time to finally look at myself. One evening, out of a bit, I stood on my balcony, looking out at the city. The lights stretched out like an endless ribbon. A light breeze blew past, carrying a familiar chill. But it no longer made me feel isolated or alone. I remembered the early days, standing right here, feeling utterly hollowed out, when my life had just collapsed, and I had no idea where to go or what to do. And then, step by step, I walked through it, not fast, not easily, but with enough certainty to make sure I would never fall back down again. My phone vibrated. A text message. Not from Vance. Not from Victoria. It was from myself. A calendar reminder I had set a very long time ago. It was just one sentence. Never forget who you are. I looked at those words and smiled softly. Not because I had just remembered, but because I knew I would never forget again. I locked the screen and looked up at the night sky. There weren't many stars visible, but there were enough to remind me that far above all these artificial city lights, there was something so much bigger. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I didn't need to carve out a space for myself in someone else's life. I didn't need to sacrifice my soul just to be validated. All I needed was to live in absolute alignment with my own choices. And this time, I chose myself. The end of the year arrived quietly. No chaos. No frantic rushing. Just like my life, which had slowly settled into a peaceful, steady flow. After all the massive tectonic shifts, I no longer measured time by catastrophic events. I measured it by mornings waking up without a crushing weight on my chest, by evenings leaving work on time, and by nights standing on the balcony, looking out at the city without a single unresolved question haunting my soul. And that beautiful simplicity was something I never thought I would cherish this much. After nearly 6 months of restructuring, the company no longer resembled a sinking ship. It had become a meticulously tuned machine. Every department knew its goals. Every employee knew their role. I no longer had to sit in on every single meeting or personally put out every minor fire. I could step back, observe, and only intervene when absolutely necessary. Not because I had gotten lazy, but because I had built a foundation so solid, it no longer required me to hold it up with my bare hands. Ms. Madeline. Leah walked into my office. Her smile was subtle, but genuine. The annual report exceeded our projections. I took the folder and flipped through the pages. The numbers weren't just impressive, they were rock solid. No erratic spikes, no gaping holes that needed to be swept under the rug. And that was the most important thing. Excellent, I said. Leah offered a slight bow. It's all thanks to you. I shook my head softly. It's thanks to everyone. She smiled and walked out, leaving me alone in the familiar office. The late afternoon sun filtered through the window. The light wasn't harsh anymore, it was soft and warm. Just like everything in my life had softened after surviving days that were once so brutally sharp. That evening, I received a text from Victoria. Ms. Madeline, I got promoted to a permanent staff position. I read it. I wasn't surprised. But I paused for a few seconds. The salary isn't huge, but I can completely support myself now. I looked at the second message and typed back. Good. Keep pushing. Short. But enough? Some relationships don't need to be restored to their original state. It's enough to just let them exist in a completely different way. A week later, I received an invitation to a grand opening for a small logistics company. The sender's name was Vance. I held the card in my hand, looking at the crisp, black typeface. No extravagant design, no glossy finish. Just a simple invitation with no personal message attached. I didn't rush to make a decision. I just placed it on my desk. On the day of the opening, I went to work as usual. I handled my tasks. LED meetings. Signed documents. Everything proceeded like a perfectly normal day. But when 5:00 p.m. rolled around, I stood by my desk, looked at the invitation one more time, and picked it up, not because I felt obligated to go, but because I wanted to close the book completely. The grand opening was small, quiet, a modest office space, a few desks, a few potted plants, and a brand new, understated sign over the door. I walked in. At first, no one noticed me, until Vance saw me. He froze for a second, then walked over. Madeline. His voice was calm, unrushed, unstressed. Congratulations. I said. Thank you. We stood there, not too close, and not too far apart, like two people who had once walked the exact same road, completely diverged without looking back, and had now coincidentally bumped into each other at a brief intersection. I didn't think you'd come, he said. I didn't think I would either, I replied. He smiled faintly. But I'm glad you did. I nodded and looked around. The office was basic but meticulously organized. There was none of his old flashy arrogance, just the markings of a real, honest beginning. I started from absolute zero, he said, as if feeling the need to explain. That's a good thing, I replied. I didn't ask further questions. I didn't offer any judgments. I just acknowledged it. After a few minutes, I placed a small envelope on a nearby table. He looked at it, but didn't open it. I know, I interrupted. But it's not for you. He froze. It's for the new beginning, I said. He stayed quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. Thank you. No extra words were needed. It was enough. I didn't stay long. I stood there for a few more minutes, then turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't linger. I knew that our lives were now moving on completely separate tracks, and they would never need to cross again. By the time I stepped outside, it was dark. The streetlights flickered on. The noise of the day had settled. I stopped for a moment. I took a deep breath and kept walking. My phone vibrated. A text from Uncle Nicholas. Madeline. Everything is finalized. I read it and smiled. Yes. One word, but it held absolutely everything. I got into my car and started the engine. The car merged smoothly onto the familiar streets, but this time, the feeling was entirely different. It wasn't a desperate search. It wasn't an escape. It was a very clear, deliberate movement forward. I knew exactly where I was going, and exactly why. When I got home, I walked out onto the balcony, a habit that had become a permanent part of my life, looking out at the sprawling city, at the lights stretching infinitely into the dark, I no longer felt small. I stood there for a long time, not dwelling on the past, not agonizing over the future, just existing entirely in the present. And in that moment, one truth became crystal clear. I didn't defeat anyone. I didn't lose anything. I simply returned to myself, to a version of me that doesn't need to lean on anyone else to exist, a version that doesn't need to prove her worth through endless sacrifices, a version that doesn't need to cling to toxic relationships out of a terrified fear of loss. I survived a marriage. I survived a collapse. I walked the grueling path to reclaim exactly what belonged to me. But the most important thing wasn't what I got back. It was what I learned. I learned that kindness is not a weakness, but it must be wielded wisely. That love is not endless endurance, but mutual respect. And that sometimes, letting go isn't a defeat, it is the only way to save your own soul. I smiled softly in the dark. The city lights burned as bright as ever. Life was moving forward. And so was I. If you have journeyed with this story down to the very last lines, perhaps right now, your soul is holding more than just emotion. Perhaps there is a deep, resonant silence, a pause, a moment to ask yourself, how many times in our own lives have we given so much that we forgot to leave anything for ourselves? Madeline's story is not just the story of one woman. It is the story of so many of us, those who believed that if we just sacrificed enough, if we just endured long enough, everything would magically fix itself. But life doesn't work that way. In some relationships, the more you give, the more it is treated as a given right. With some people, the more ground you surrender, the further they will push you into a corner. And sometimes, you don't lose because you are weak. You lose because you chose to endure for far too long. Madeline was exactly like that. She lacked neither intelligence, nor character, nor capability. But the thing that kept her trapped for 5 long years was something deeply familiar to us all: emotion and faith. The faith that the person she loved would eventually change. The faith that his family would eventually understand. The faith that she just needed to try a little bit harder. But life does not reward blind endurance. It returns to you exactly what you allow others to do to you. The turning point for Madeline did not happen when she got her money. It didn't happen when she took back her company. It happened the exact moment she said one simple word: enough. Enough supporting an irresponsible person. Enough forgiving the unforgivable. Enough causing pain to herself. That wasn't cruelty. That was absolute clarity. And it was from that exact moment that everything began to change. Notice how Madeline didn't seek loud, explosive revenge. She didn't stage dramatic, screaming scenes. She didn't waste breath trying to prove she was right. She simply took back what she never should have given away in the first place, and let everything fall exactly where it naturally belonged. The company didn't collapse because she destroyed it. It collapsed because it was rotting from the inside out. The man didn't lose everything because it was stolen from him. He lost it because he never truly owned it to begin with. That is cause and effect. It isn't some distant, mystical concept. It is the clear, undeniable result of every small choice we make in life. And the most beautiful part of this story isn't Madeline's ultimate success. It's how gracefully she let go. She didn't look back. She didn't torture herself. She didn't live in the past. She walked forward with total peace. She forgave not to rekindle a relationship, but so she wouldn't have to carry the heavy, toxic baggage of hatred. She helped not out of lingering romantic feelings, but because she refused to let her heart turn bitter and cold. And she walked away, not because she lost the game, but because she finally realized her true worth. If you recognized a piece of yourself somewhere in this story, maybe the Madeline from the early days, or someone currently standing at the crossroads of a painfully difficult choice, remember one very simple rule. You don't have to be incredibly strong from the very beginning, but you absolutely must be clear-headed enough to know exactly when it is time to stop. Life doesn't demand that you be perfect. It only asks that you stop repeating the exact same mistake, in the exact same place.